The station rotated with a quiet, patient rhythm that most humans never noticed after the first few days, but I never quite got used to it. It wasn't the motion itself. It was the feeling that the place was thinking while it turned, like some enormous creature pretending to be architecture. The walls curved in ways that made no structural sense, pale and smooth like bone polished over centuries. And sometimes, if you stared too long, you could swear they shifted ever so slightly, adjusting to something you couldn't see. I was posted near the inner ceremonial corridor, which sounded important until you realized it mostly meant standing still for long periods, while trying not to look like you were thinking about food. Officially, I was security. Unofficially, I was the human decoration that reassured visiting dignitaries that we weren't going to accidentally start a war over a misunderstanding about hand gestures. Again, the air carried that same faint metallic sweetness I still couldn't describe properly. It wasn't unpleasant. It just made everything feel slightly unreal, like I'd walked into someone else's memory and forgot to leave. My translator unit rested against my collarbone, a small, obedient device that converted the alien language into something simple and manageable. It buzzed occasionally, like it was proud of itself. I let it do its job, nodding at the right moments, answering when necessary. No one ever questioned it. No one ever suspected that I didn't actually need it. That had started months ago. At first it was just patterns, repetition, certain sounds appearing in predictable places. Then those sounds began to feel familiar. Not in a way I could explain, just something in the back of my mind connecting pieces before I consciously understood them. I told myself it was coincidence. Then I started understanding words before the translator spoke them, then entire sentences. At that point, I considered reporting it. Then I imagined the paperwork, so I kept quiet. It seemed like the safer option at the time. Now I wasn't so sure. Footsteps approached from the far end of the corridor, though footsteps wasn't quite accurate. Their movement was too smooth, too controlled, like gravity had signed a special agreement with them. I straightened instinctively, shifting into that professional stance that said I was alert but not threatening, present but not intrusive. It was a delicate balance, like pretending to be furniture that could also stop a laser blast. The Queen passed first. Even after weeks of seeing her, there was still something about her presence that disrupted thought. She looked human at a glance. Same proportions, same posture. But the differences revealed themselves the longer you looked. Her ears extended in elegant, elongated curves, tapering slightly at the ends. Her skin held a faint, almost luminous quality, as if light hesitated before leaving it. Her eyes moved with precise awareness, taking in everything without appearing to focus on anything. Behind her walked the princess. If the Queen felt like inevitability, the princess felt like a question. She was younger, though young was relative in a species that might live for centuries. Her movements were less restrained, her gaze more curious. Where the Queen's presence filled the space, the princess seemed to explore it, as if she hadn't yet decided what the world meant. They didn't acknowledge me as they passed, which was expected. I was background, a necessary detail. They entered the chamber at the end of the corridor, the doors sealing behind them with a soft, seamless motion. I should have stayed where I was. Instead, I shifted slightly closer. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough that the faint resonance of their voices reached me through the curved walls. The material carried sound in a strange way, bending it, softening it, but not fully hiding it. The translator at my collar buzzed quietly, trying to interpret. I ignored it. Their real voices reached me beneath the distortion, layered and complex, each word carrying more than one meaning. It was like listening to a melody and harmony at the same time, except both were language. The Queen spoke first. "You will proceed with the selection," she said, though that was only the surface of it. Beneath those words was something else. Structure, intention, a directive that felt almost encoded. The princess responded, her tone careful. "The criteria remains uncertain." There was hesitation there. Not refusal, not agreement, something in between. The Queen's voice softened, but the meaning sharpened. "You will marry a human." My brain stopped. just for a second. Then it restarted all at once, like a system realizing it had encountered something it absolutely did not want to process. Marry a human. That was fine. That was diplomatic. That was normal. Probably, somewhere. In some version of the galaxy where I wasn't currently standing 10 meters away, trying very hard not to make a noise. I leaned very slightly against the wall because suddenly standing felt like an ambitious activity. The princess didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice carried something new. Is this your will? Another layer beneath that. Not just a question, a test. The queen's reply came without hesitation. It is the path required. Required. That word settled heavily, even before I fully unpacked what it carried beneath it. This wasn't advice. This wasn't a suggestion. It was something decided long before this conversation ever happened. I stared at the smooth curve of the wall in front of me as if it might offer guidance. It did not. Instead, it reflected a slightly distorted version of my own face, which currently looked like a man who had just accidentally overheard his potential involvement in a royal interspecies marriage. I took a slow breath. There were several possible explanations for what I had just heard. Most of them were worse than the others. One particularly unhelpful thought surfaced. Statistically speaking, I was one of the few humans on this station. I immediately rejected that thought. It returned anyway. Inside the chamber, the princess spoke again, quieter this time. And if the human does not understand? The queen's answer carried something I felt more than heard. He will. I blinked. That felt specific, uncomfortably specific. I straightened again, stepping back into my original position as the doors to the chamber began to open. My posture snapped into place, expression neutral. The picture of a soldier who had heard absolutely nothing of interest. The queen and princess stepped out. For a brief moment as they passed, the princess's gaze flickered toward me. Just for an instant, her expression didn't change, but there was something in her eyes. Recognition, curiosity, or maybe I was imagining things. I hoped I was imagining things, because if I wasn't, then there was a very real possibility that I had just become part of a plan I did not understand, involving a language I wasn't supposed to know, and a marriage I definitely had not signed up for. And somehow the most concerning part of all of it was the quiet certainty in the queen's voice. He will. I resisted the sudden, very strong urge to check behind me, just in case she had been talking about someone else. Unfortunately, I had a feeling she hadn't. The next cycle felt longer than usual, though the station's rotation remained perfectly consistent, as if time itself had signed a contract it refused to break. I stood in the same corridor, same position, same carefully neutral expression, but everything had shifted in a way I couldn't quite measure. It was like discovering a hidden message in a familiar sentence. You couldn't unread it, and suddenly every word seemed suspicious. I told myself I was overthinking. That lasted exactly 12 seconds. The translator unit hummed softly against my collarbone, processing distant conversations I didn't bother listening to. It had become a kind of comfort, like a friend who confidently explained things incorrectly while you nodded along out of politeness. I adjusted it slightly, not because it needed adjusting, but because it gave my hands something to do, besides fidget in a way that would definitely get noticed by someone who had far too many eyes for their own good. Across the corridor, two alien attendants exchanged a brief conversation. The translator offered a flat, harmless version about scheduling and ceremonial timing. The real words beneath it, however, carried layered nuances about hierarchy, timing of influence, and something that sounded suspiciously like a polite argument about who had the more impressive ancestors. I had learned to separate the layers instinctively now, like listening to two conversations at once. I was starting to suspect that if I stayed here long enough, I'd either become fluent or completely lose my mind. Possibly both. Footsteps, or the alien equivalent, approached again, smooth and controlled. I didn't need to look to know who it was this time. There was a pattern to presence, a subtle shift in the air that came before certain individuals appeared. The queen had one. The princess had a different one. Hers felt lighter, less fixed, like something still deciding what it wanted to be. She stopped in front of me. That was new. I kept my posture steady, eyes forward, expression neutral. Internally, I was calculating every possible mistake I had made in the last 24 hours, and wondering which one had finally caught up with me. "Human soldier," she said. The translator buzzed. "You stand here often." I nodded slightly. "Yes, that is my assignment." Simple, safe, completely unremarkable. Her head tilted just a fraction, her long ears shifting subtly with the motion. Up close, the differences were clearer. Her features were almost perfectly human, but too precise, too balanced, as if shaped with intention rather than chance. Her eyes held that same sharp awareness I had noticed before, scanning, measuring. "You observe much," she continued. The translator rendered it as, "You watch carefully." Close enough. "I try to remain attentive," I replied, "also safe, also boring." She stepped a little closer. That was less safe. The distance between us now felt intentional. Not threatening, but deliberate in a way that made my brain start highlighting every possible interpretation, like an overactive warning system. "You understand more than you are told," she said. The translator hesitated for half a second before offering, "You seem perceptive." I almost laughed. Not out loud. That would have been a mistake. But internally, the difference between those two versions was so dramatic, it felt like the translator had just turned a complex equation into, "He looks smart." I kept my face steady. "I only understand what I am trained to understand," I said. That sounded convincing. I hoped. She watched me for a moment longer. Then she smiled. It wasn't a wide smile. It wasn't even particularly expressive. But it was enough to shift something in the air between us, like a hidden mechanism quietly activating. "Your training must be exceptional," she said. The translator, doing its best, simplified it into, "You are well trained." I was beginning to feel slightly offended on behalf of the language. There was a pause, a long one. Long enough that I became very aware of the fact that I was standing in a corridor, having a conversation that was probably not standard protocol, with a princess who may or may not suspect that I understood everything she was actually saying. This was not in the handbook. Then again, neither was accidental participation in interspecies marriage negotiations, so the handbook had already lost most of its authority. "I have a question," she said. The translator brightened, as if excited to be useful again. "May I ask something?" I nodded. "Do humans always pretend not to understand when they are uncertain?" She continued, her voice calm. "Or is that something you have developed uniquely?" The translator paused. It buzzed. It gave up. "To uncertain meaning unclear," it offered weakly. I blinked. That was not helpful. I chose my response carefully. Sometimes, I said, it is safer to understand less. That was true. It was also the most honest thing I had said so far. Her gaze held mine for a fraction longer than necessary. Then she did something unexpected. She laughed. It was quiet, controlled, but unmistakably genuine. The sound carried that same layered quality as her speech, but the meaning was clear even without translation. Amusement. "Then you must feel very safe," she said. The translator, proud of itself, declared, "You are safe." I was starting to think the translator and I were having very different experiences. She stepped back slightly, the distance returning to something more formal. The shift was subtle, but noticeable, like a curtain being drawn without anyone acknowledging it. "For now," she added. That part the translator got right. She turned to leave, then paused just briefly, her gaze flickering back to me. "There are many meanings," and she said, softer this time. "You should be careful which ones you choose to hear." The translator hesitated again, then settled on, "Be careful." That was technically accurate. She walked away, her presence fading into the corridor's quiet rhythm, leaving me standing exactly where I had been, except now everything felt even less stable than before. I exhaled slowly. Well, that had gone, not terribly, which under the circumstances felt like a significant achievement. I adjusted my stance again, eyes forward, posture steady, just a human soldier, standing in a corridor, understanding nothing, absolutely nothing at all, except, of course, for the growing realization that I was very much not invisible anymore, and that whatever plan had been set in motion, I had just taken my first step into it, whether I meant to or not. I resisted the urge to look down at the translator unit. It was still humming softly, completely unaware of how useless it had just been. I almost felt bad for it. Almost. By the next cycle, the station had decided to pretend nothing unusual was happening. This was impressive, considering I was fairly certain everything unusual was happening. The corridor remained quiet, the same pale curvature reflecting soft ambient light, the same distant hum of systems that didn't sound mechanical so much as intentional. If I focused too long, I could almost believe the place was breathing. I chose not to focus too long. I had enough things trying to breathe on me without adding architecture to the list. I had also made a decision, a very mature, carefully considered decision. I was going to act completely normal. This plan lasted until I realized I had no idea what normal meant anymore. Two attendants passed by, their voices overlapping in layered tones. The translator offered something about scheduling ceremonial alignments. The actual meaning beneath it unfolded automatically in my mind. Timing of influence, positioning of observers, subtle negotiation of status. It was like hearing someone say, "We'll have lunch at noon," while actually meaning, "We will decide the fate of 3 political factions over soup." I kept my expression steady. If this was what everyday conversation sounded like here, I was beginning to understand why they looked at humans the way one might look at a particularly enthusiastic but confused animal. Across the corridor, a tall figure in darker ceremonial plating paused near an archway. One of the Queen's inner court, if I remembered correctly. He didn't look at me directly, but I felt the attention anyway, like standing too close to a quiet storm. "The convergence approaches," he said to another. The translator, eager as always, simplified it to, "The meeting is soon." The real meaning carried weight. Not a meeting, a convergence. Not soon. Inevitable. I resisted the urge to sigh. Good, excellent. Everything was going exactly as poorly as expected. I shifted my weight slightly, adjusting my stance, trying to look like a man whose biggest concern was whether he would get assigned an extra shift later. Internally, I was trying to determine how many layers of meaning I had missed in the last few months, and whether any of them involved me accidentally agreeing to something life-changing without realizing it. Statistically, the answer was probably yes. A soft movement broke my thoughts. The princess again. She approached from the far end of the corridor, alone this time. No attendants, no visible guards, which either meant she didn't need them, or they were somewhere I couldn't see. Given everything I had observed so far, I leaned toward the second option. I straightened automatically. She slowed as she reached me, her gaze briefly shifting past me, then returning, as if confirming something invisible. "You remain," she said. The translator, relieved to have something simple, offered, "You are still here." I nodded. "Yes." She tilted her head slightly, studying me with that same quiet precision. "There is stability in repetition," she continued, her voice carrying that familiar layered resonance. "It allows patterns to emerge." The translator hesitated, then decided, "Routine is useful." "Close enough." I considered my response. "I found that repetition can also make things predictable," I said. "Safe. Neutral." She smiled again. That was becoming a pattern I wasn't entirely comfortable with. "Predictable things are easier to guide," she said. The translator confidently announced, "Predictable is good." I almost felt bad for it again. Almost. There was a pause, but not an empty one. It felt active, like a space where something was being measured, even if I couldn't see how. Behind her, 2 members of the court passed by, their voices low. The translator ignored them, focusing on my conversation. My mind, however, caught the underlying meaning effortlessly. The human variable remains unverified. The Queen has already determined compatibility. Determination does not ensure stability. I kept my face still. That word again. Human, variable. I resisted the very strong urge to turn my head. The princess didn't move, but something in her posture shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if she had also registered the conversation behind her. Of course she had. She seemed like the kind of person who would register things that hadn't even happened yet. You listen, she said quietly. The translator offered, you hear things. That was dangerously accurate. I hear what is around me, I replied. Technically true, also extremely unhelpful. Her gaze held mine for a moment longer, then softened just slightly, as if she had reached some conclusion she wasn't sharing. There are many voices here, she said. Not all of them speak with intent. The translator simplified it too. There are many people. I briefly considered removing the translator and giving it a moment to reflect on its life choices. Instead, I nodded. I've noticed, I said. She took a small step closer again, closing that careful distance she seemed to control so precisely. And some voices, she continued, are not meant to be understood. That sentence settled heavily. The translator, clearly overwhelmed, chose the safest option. Some things are not clear. I exhaled slowly. That seems intentional, I said. Her eyes flickered, just slightly. Recognition again. Yes, she said. A single word. But this time there was no second layer hidden beneath it. That was new. For a brief moment, the complexity dropped away, leaving something simpler, more direct. It was strangely unsettling. Behind her, the corridor shifted subtly as a distant mechanism activated, the walls adjusting in a way that was too smooth to be mechanical. The station, once again, reminding everyone that it was not entirely passive. I watched the movement out of the corner of my eye. You are adjusting, she said suddenly. The translator, slightly confused, offered, You are changing. I blinked. That was not a sentence I wanted to hear without context. I'm adapting, I said carefully. That sounded better. More controlled. More intentional. She considered that. Adaptation implies survival, she said. Survival implies threat. The translator hesitated, then delivered, Change means danger. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was accurate. Sometimes, I said, it just means learning. She held my gaze, and for the first time I saw something like uncertainty there. Not confusion, not doubt, just openness. A space where something had not yet been decided. Learning, she repeated. This time the word carried weight in a different way. Not layered, not hidden, just present. Then as quickly as it had appeared, the moment shifted. The layers returned. The structure reformed. She stepped back slightly. The convergence approaches, she said. The translator, pleased to be back on familiar ground, declared, The meeting is soon. I nodded. Of course it was. It was always soon. She turned to leave, then paused once more, just long enough to glance back. Be careful what you understand, she said softly. The translator, doing its best, offered, Be careful. I watched her walk away, her presence fading into the quiet rhythm of the station. Then I looked straight ahead again. Same corridor, same position, same role. Except now I knew one more thing. I wasn't just listening anymore. I was being listened to. And somewhere in all of this, between layered meanings and careful words, a pattern was forming. One that, unfortunately, seemed to involve me a little more than I would have preferred. I took a slow breath. Adaptation implies survival. Survival implies threat. I resisted the urge to smile, because if that was true, then I was adapting very quickly, which probably meant I should be at least a little concerned, possibly a lot. But for now, I stayed exactly where I was, still, quiet, understanding nothing, and somehow, more than ever before. The station dimmed its lights without warning, not completely, just enough that the soft glow along the curved walls shifted toward a cooler tone, as if the entire structure had decided to take a slow breath and hold it. I noticed it immediately, which was unfortunate, because noticing things lately had a way of leading to more things that I did not want to notice. I remained in position, naturally, calm, professional, completely unbothered by the fact that the walls might be participating in whatever was about to happen. A low resonance spread through the corridor, not loud, not sharp, just present. It vibrated somewhere between sound and feeling, brushing lightly against my chest as if asking permission to exist there. The translator hummed in response, confused but determined, like a student trying to take notes during a lecture in a language it absolutely did not understand. System alignment, it whispered helpfully. That was, reassuringly vague. Two members of the court moved quickly past me, their usual smooth composure slightly disrupted. Not panic, not urgency, just acceleration. Their voices overlapped in layered tones, sharper than before. The sequence has begun. Earlier than projected. The Queen has allowed this. Allowed. I resisted the urge to close my eyes. Of course she had. Why wouldn't she allow something mysterious and potentially life-altering to begin earlier than expected? That sounded exactly like the kind of week I was having. The resonance deepened, then stabilized. The walls responded, subtle shifts in curvature, almost imperceptible, like a muscle tightening beneath skin. I watched the surface nearest me ripple faintly, light bending along its contours in a way that definitely did not follow any known laws of architecture I was familiar with. I made a mental note. Do not lean on the walls during system alignment. It felt like a good rule. Footsteps approached again. I didn't need to look. I did anyway. The princess moved toward me with a pace that was neither hurried nor slow, but deliberate in a way that made everything else feel slightly out of sync. Her gaze was sharper this time, focused, as if whatever uncertainty had existed before had been temporarily set aside. You feel it, she said. The translator perked up. You notice. That was generous. I feel something, I admitted. Honesty seemed like a reasonable strategy at this point. Not complete honesty. That would be reckless. Just enough honesty to appear cooperative. She stopped in front of me, closer than before. The station is adjusting, she said. The translator hesitated, then offered. The station is changing. I glanced briefly at the wall beside me. Yes, I said. It does that. That was probably not the most insightful response, but it was the one I had. Her lips curved slightly. Amusement again. Good. If she was amused, that meant I had not yet made a catastrophic mistake. Probably. This is not routine adjustment, she continued. It is responsive. The translator, trying very hard, delivered, it is reacting. That word landed. Reacting. To what? I decided not to ask that out loud. Instead, I said, to the convergence? Her eyes flickered. There it was again. That moment. Recognition. Not surprise, not confusion. Just confirmation. Yes, she said. No layers, no hidden meaning. Just yes. That was becoming a pattern I didn't fully understand, and that made it significantly more concerning. Another pulse of resonance moved through the corridor, stronger this time. I felt it in my chest again, slightly deeper, like the station was knocking politely to see if anyone was home. I resisted the urge to knock back. Behind the princess, a section of the wall unfolded, not opened, unfolded. The surface separated along invisible seams, layers peeling back in a motion that was too fluid to be mechanical. Light spilled from within, brighter, warmer, carrying with it a faint hum that felt structured, like language. I stared, briefly, then remembered I was supposed to be a professional and returned my gaze forward. Mostly, my peripheral vision was working very hard. The inner chamber is preparing, she said. The translator, confident again, announced, the room is ready. I almost admired its optimism. That seems important, I said. She studied me for a moment. It is, she replied. Then after a pause, she added, you are part of it. The translator froze, it buzzed, it gave up entirely. You are here, it offered weakly. I exhaled slowly. Right. Of course, I was here. That was definitely the issue. I'm security, I said carefully. I'm part of many things. That sounded reasonable. Generic. Safely unremarkable. She tilted her head slightly. You are not here by accident, she said. The translator, trying to recover its dignity, simplified it to, you are meant to be here. That was worse. Significantly worse. I considered my options. Option 1, pretend I did not understand the implication. Option 2, actually not understand the implication. Option 3, laugh and hope that resolved everything. I chose a refined version of option 1. I was assigned, I said. She watched me, closely. Then unexpectedly, she stepped even closer. This was becoming a trend I was not entirely comfortable with, mostly because I had no idea what the correct response to it was. Assignment, she repeated. Is that what you believe this is? The translator, valiantly attempting to keep up, offered. Is this your job? I almost smiled, almost. Yes, I said. That felt like the safest answer available. She held my gaze for a long moment. Then slowly she smiled again. But this time, it was different. Not amused, not curious, certain. That is, one meaning, she said. The translator, exhausted, settled for, that is one way. I swallowed the urge to respond, because I had the distinct feeling that anything I said next would only confirm something I was not yet ready to confirm. Another pulse of resonance moved through the station, stronger still. The unfolded wall behind her shifted, the inner chamber beyond it becoming more visible. Shapes moved within, structures, or perhaps mechanisms, arranged in patterns that felt deliberate, almost ceremonial. The convergence, it was starting. I remained still, because that was what I did. Stand, observe, understand nothing. Except now, I was fairly certain that I was not just observing anymore, and that whatever was happening inside that chamber was happening with me in mind. The princess stepped back slightly, restoring that careful distance once more. It begins, she said. The translator, relieved to be useful again, declared, It is starting. I nodded. Of course it was. She turned, moving toward the open chamber, then paused just at the threshold. Without looking back, she spoke one last time. You should decide, she said softly, which meanings you will accept. The translator hesitated, then offered, You should choose. I watched her disappear into the light. Then I looked at the open chamber. Then straight ahead again. Same corridor, same position, same role. Except now there was a very real possibility that I was standing at the edge of something I could not step away from. I adjusted my stance slightly, took a slow breath, and for the first time since arriving on this station, seriously considered the possibility that understanding less might no longer be an option. The chamber did not invite me in. That would have been simple, clear, polite even. Instead, it remained open in a way that felt expectant, like a door that had already decided you were coming through and was just waiting for you to stop pretending otherwise. I stayed where I was for approximately 3 seconds. Then I stepped forward. Not because I had made a decision, not because I was brave, mostly because standing there any longer felt like arguing with gravity. The threshold reacted the moment I crossed it, not visibly. There was no flash of light, no dramatic shift. Just a subtle tightening in the air, like walking into a space that had just become aware of you. The resonance I had been feeling in the corridor sharpened, aligning into something more structured, less like background noise and more like intention. I resisted the urge to apologize to the room. Inside, the architecture changed. The curved walls gave way to layered formations that rose and folded into each other like frozen motion. Lines of soft light traced along their surfaces, not static, but moving in slow, deliberate patterns that reminded me uncomfortably of language. Not written language, spoken language, as if the room itself was mid-conversation and I had walked in halfway through. Good, excellent. I had always wanted to interrupt an ancient, possibly sentient structure. At the center of the chamber stood the princess. She wasn't alone. Several members of the court formed a wide arc around her, their positions precise, their stillness almost absolute. The queen stood at the far end, elevated slightly, not by a throne, but by the way the space itself seemed to rise beneath her. I stopped. Not dramatically, just enough. The translator hummed uncertainly, as if it had realized it had been brought to a place far beyond its qualifications. Ceremonial gathering, it offered weakly. That was one way to describe it. The real meaning beneath the layered voices around me unfolded immediately, overlapping, complex, impossible to ignore. The alignment is stable. The human presence is confirmed. Observe the response. I kept my face neutral. Internally, I was beginning to suspect that I had made a series of small, reasonable decisions that had collectively led me into a very unreasonable situation. The princess turned toward me, not sharply, not with surprise, just naturally, like she had expected me to be there all along. "You came," she said. The translator, grateful for simplicity, replied, "You are here." I nodded once. Yes, that felt like an appropriate level of participation. A low pulse moved through the chamber, stronger than before. This time it didn't just brush against my chest, it settled there, like something finding a place it recognized. I frowned slightly. That was new. The light along the wall shifted, the patterns accelerating just enough to suggest a change in state. The layered structures seemed to lean inward, subtly as if focusing, on the center of the room, on the princess, and increasingly on me. Of course, why not? I adjusted my stance, professional, calm, not at all concerned that the room might be studying me. "You feel the resonance," the princess said. The translator, trying its best, delivered, "You feel something." I exhaled. "Yes," I said. "I feel something." Understatement, probably the greatest understatement of my life. She took a step toward me. The court did not move. The queen did not speak. Everything else seemed to wait. "It responds to compatibility," she continued, her voice carrying that familiar layered depth. "Not intention, not status, not expectation." The translator hesitated, then simplified it to, "It reacts to match." Match. That word echoed. Compatibility. I had a very strong suspicion I did not like where this was going. "I'm not sure I applied for that," I said. The words slipped out before I could stop them. A few members of the court shifted almost imperceptibly. The princess paused. Then she laughed, softly, genuinely. The sound carried through the chamber, cutting cleanly through the tension in a way that felt almost human. "I do not believe applications were considered," she said. The translator, proud of itself, offered, "No one asked." That was accurate. Unhelpful, but accurate. Another pulse moved through the chamber. Stronger. This time the patterns along the walls reacted faster, aligning, converging toward a central point between us. I felt it again in my chest. Not pressure, not pain, just recognition. Like hearing a word you didn't know you knew. I shifted slightly. That did not help. "Remain still," the princess said. The translator, suddenly very confident, declared, "Do not move." I froze. That seemed wise. The light intensified, not brighter, more focused. The patterns along the walls began to synchronize, their movement no longer independent but unified, like a system reaching agreement. The link is forming to unexpected stability. This was not projected. I stared straight ahead. I was not going to look around. I was not going to react. I was a professional. A very professional individual currently being linked to something, probably. The princess stepped closer again, closer than before, close enough that I could see the fine details of her expression, the subtle shifts in her gaze, the way her focus held steady, unwavering. "This is why," she said quietly. The translator softened its tone, as if it understood the importance of the moment. "This is the reason." I swallowed. "That would have been good to know earlier," I said. A pause, then, despite everything, she smiled again, and this time there was no uncertainty in it. "Would it have changed your decision?" she asked. The translator rendered it perfectly. For once. I considered that, briefly. Then I shook my head slightly. "No," I said. That was the truth. Not because I was fearless, not because I understood what was happening, but because at some point, the situation had stopped being about choice in the way I was used to. Another pulse, stronger. The chamber responded. The patterns converged fully now, focusing into a single intricate formation that hovered in the space between us. Not physical, not entirely visible, but undeniably present. The resonance in my chest aligned with it, perfectly. I exhaled slowly. "Well," I said, because apparently that was the level of commentary I was capable of under these circumstances. That seems important. The princess's eyes softened, just slightly. Yes, she said. And for the first time since this began, I believed her completely. The chamber did not settle after the alignment. That would have been comforting. Instead, it evolved. The patterns suspended between us did not fade or stabilize in any simple way. They deepened. Lines of light folded inward, layering over themselves in increasingly complex structures, like a language deciding to become more honest than it had ever intended to be. I stood very still, mostly because the last time I had considered moving, the room had politely suggested that I should not, so I didn't. This felt like a reasonable life strategy. The resonance in my chest remained, steady now, no longer a pulse but a presence. Not uncomfortable, not invasive, just there, like a thought I hadn't finished yet. Across the chamber, one of the court members finally moved. A tall figure stepped forward from the ark, their posture precise, their gaze fixed not on me, but on the structure forming between the princess and I. Their voice cut cleanly through the layered hum of the room. This exceeds projected parameters. The translator, trying to recover some dignity, simplified it to, "This is unexpected." That seemed like an understatement worthy of professional recognition. Another voice followed, sharper. "The human variable is influencing the system." Human variable? I resisted the urge to look around for a different human. There were none. Unfortunate. The princess did not turn toward them. Her focus remained on the structure, on me, as if the rest of the chamber had become secondary. "It is not influence," she said calmly. "It is response." The translator delivered, "It is reacting." That word again. Reacting. To me. I exhaled slowly. This was becoming a pattern I was increasingly uncomfortable with. The court members stepped closer, their presence heavier now, pressing against the air like a question that demanded an answer. "Response implies compatibility," they said. Compatibility was not confirmed. The translator hesitated, then offered, "Match was not proven." I almost raised my hand. Not to interrupt. Just to clarify that I had not personally confirmed anything either. I decided against it. This did not feel like a meeting where raising your hand would improve your situation. The queen spoke. She had not moved, but her voice filled the chamber in a way that made movement irrelevant. "It is confirmed now." The translator for once did not simplify it. It didn't need to. Silence followed, not empty silence. The kind that carried weight, that shifted the balance of the room without anyone needing to acknowledge it. The court member stepped back. That was reassuring. Slightly. The structure between us shifted again, the layers tightening, refining. I felt the resonance in my chest adjust with it, aligning more precisely, as if the two were synchronizing in ways I could not fully perceive. I cleared my throat, quietly, because if I was going to be part of this, I felt I should at least contribute something. "So," I said, keeping my voice steady, "this is normal?" The translator hesitated. It buzzed. It chose survival. "This is expected," it said. I blinked. That was not what I had said. The princess glanced at me, and for a brief moment, the tension softened again. "You are concerned," she said. The translator, eager, declared, "You are worried." I considered that. "Yes," I said. "That seems appropriate." A pause, then she smiled again. Not broadly, but enough. "That is reasonable," she said. The translator nodded, as if it agreed. Good. At least someone here understood the situation. Another pulse moved through the chamber, but this time it was different. Not stronger, clearer. The patterns between us resolved further, forming a structure that felt less like shifting language and more like a defined statement. I couldn't read it, not consciously, but something in me recognized it anyway. That was the part I didn't like. The part where my brain decided to understand things I had not agreed to understand. "This is the initial phase," the princess continued, her voice steady. "The connection will stabilize." The translator, doing its best, offered, "This is the beginning." Beginning. Of course it was. That word carried far too many implications for my current comfort level. "And after that?" I asked. The question slipped out before I could filter it. Several members of the court shifted again, their attention sharpening. The princess did not hesitate. After that, she said, we will see what becomes possible. The translator simplified it to, then we will know. That was somehow worse. I exhaled. Right, I said. No pressure. A few of the court members reacted. Subtle shifts, barely noticeable, but there. Not amusement, exactly. More like recalibration, as if they were adjusting to the fact that I continued to speak in ways that did not align with their expectations. I was starting to think that was my primary contribution to this entire situation. The structure between us pulsed again, then settled. For the first time since I had entered the chamber, the movement stopped. Not completely, but enough. The resonance in my chest stabilized with it, becoming quieter, less insistent, like a conversation that had reached a temporary pause. I took a slow breath. That felt like progress. Possibly. The queen stepped forward. The space itself seemed to adjust to her movement, the chamber subtly reorienting, as if acknowledging her presence in a way that went beyond simple respect. She looked at me, directly. There was no ambiguity in it, no layers, no hidden meaning, just focus. You understand more than you should, she said. The translator, unusually respectful, repeated it exactly. I considered my options. There were fewer of them now than before. Yes, I said. That felt like the correct answer. At least it felt like the honest one. Her gaze did not shift. And yet you remained silent. Also true. Yes. Another pause, then, you adapted. The translator echoed it. You adapted. I almost smiled. That's one way to describe it, I said. Her expression did not change, but something in the air did. Not tension, not threat, just acknowledgement. That is why this is possible, she said. The translator, precise, delivered it without alteration. Possible. I looked at the structure between me and the princess, at the chamber, at the court, then back at the queen. I would have appreciated a warning, I said. The words came out calmer than I felt. A few of the court members shifted again. The princess glanced at me. And then, the queen spoke. You would not have believed it. The translator did not simplify. It didn't need to. I exhaled. She was probably right. That was the frustrating part. Another moment passed. Then the queen stepped back. The chamber responded, the subtle tension easing, the patterns along the walls slowing to their earlier rhythm. The convergence was not over, but something had completed. A phase, a step. I remained where I was, still, quiet, trying very hard to process the fact that I had just been calmly informed that I was part of something possible that had not been expected, and that apparently my ability to accidentally learn an alien language had somehow qualified me for it. I glanced briefly at the princess. She was watching me, not analyzing, not testing, just watching. I looked forward again, took another slow breath, and came to a realization that I was not entirely comfortable with. I was no longer trying to understand less. Now, I wanted to understand more, which based on everything that had happened so far, was probably a very bad idea. The chamber no longer felt like it was observing me. It felt like it was waiting. The difference was small, but important. Observing implied distance. Waiting implied expectation. And I had reached the point where pretending I didn't notice that difference felt less like caution and more like denial. I stood where I had been, the resonance in my chest now quiet, settled into something that no longer demanded attention. It was still there, but it no longer felt foreign. That was probably the most concerning part. Across from me, the princess had not moved. Neither had I, which under normal circumstances would have been an awkward silence. Here it felt like a conversation. No translator, no layered distortion, just presence. I took a slow breath. Well, Juan, I said, because apparently I had decided that was my role in this story. If this is the part where something irreversible happens, I'd appreciate a brief explanation. Her expression shifted, not amusement, not curiosity, something softer. You are already past that point, she said. That was not reassuring. I nodded slowly. Good, I said. I like knowing I've made life-changing decisions without realizing it. It keeps things exciting. A pause, then she laughed again. This time it was easier, less guarded. The sound carried through the chamber, and for a moment the space itself seemed to respond, the patterns along the walls softening, aligning in a way that felt lighter. You are adapting well, she said. I exhaled. I'm trying not to panic in a way that looks professional, I replied. That is effective, she said. The fact that she said that without even a hint of irony was both impressive and slightly alarming. Behind her, the court had grown quieter. Not gone, not absent, just less central. The queen remained where she stood, watching, but not intervening. Whatever needed to be decided now was no longer hers to decide. I realized that without anyone needing to say it. That was new. I looked at the princess, really looked, not as a diplomat, not as a variable, not as part of some layered, encoded directive, just her. She looked human, almost. Her long ears curved slightly as she tilted her head, her expression focused but no longer guarded. There was still that precision, that awareness, but now there was something else alongside it. Choice. You said this was a directive, I said. Your mother's words. She nodded. They were. And now, a pause long enough to matter. Now they are an option. That settled something. Not in the room. In me. I nodded slowly. That's better, I said. I tend to respond poorly to being assigned to things like marriage. Another pause. Then, her lips curved again. That is reasonable, she said. I shifted my weight slightly, the first movement I had allowed myself without hesitation since entering the chamber. That's reassuring, I said. I was starting to think I'd missed a meeting. You did, she replied. I blinked, then she added softer. But it would not have changed the outcome. I considered that, then nodded. Fair. Another quiet moment passed between us, but it wasn't empty anymore. It wasn't filled with uncertainty or hidden meanings or careful tests. It was clear, and that was more unfamiliar than anything else I had experienced here. I glanced briefly toward the queen. She was still watching, not evaluating, not controlling, just observing. And for the first time, it didn't feel like pressure. It felt like trust. That was new too. I looked back at the princess. So, I said, because apparently I had committed to finishing every important moment with the least dramatic phrasing possible. What happens now? She took a small step closer, not testing, not measuring, just closing the distance. Now, she said, we decide what this becomes. No layers, no hidden meanings, just that. I exhaled slowly. That was manageable, complicated, possibly dangerous, but manageable. Okay, I said, that I can work with. Another pause, then I added, I'd still like to suggest a slower pace, maybe less chamber activation next time. She smiled. I will consider that. Progress. I glanced down briefly at the translator unit resting against my collar. It hummed quietly, completely unaware that it had become irrelevant. I reached up and turned it off. The silence that followed was different, not emptier, clearer. When I looked back at her, there was no separation anymore. No filter, just understanding. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't complete, but it was real. And for the first time since I had arrived on this station, I wasn't trying to hide that. I understand you, I said. The words felt simple, but they carried weight. She held my gaze. And I understand you, she replied, no translation needed. Behind us the chamber responded, not with intensity, not with pressure, just a subtle shift, the patterns along the walls settling into a steady, balanced rhythm, like a system that had reached agreement. The convergence wasn't ending. It was stabilizing, becoming something else, something ongoing. I took another breath. Then, because I couldn't help myself, so, I said, does this mean I'm still on guard duty? Or have I been promoted to something I don't fully understand? She tilted her head slightly. "You are still here," she said. I nodded. "That sounds like a promotion." She laughed again. And this time I didn't feel like an outsider hearing it. I felt like part of the moment that caused it. I looked around the chamber one last time, at the court, at the queen, at the structure that was no longer forming, but simply existing. Then back at her, and I realized something. I had arrived here trying to understand less, to stay safe, to remain unnoticed. Now, I was choosing to understand more, not because I had to, because I wanted to, which for reasons I could not fully explain, felt like the most important decision I had made since stepping onto the station. I straightened slightly, not out of habit, out of intent. "All right," I said. "Let's see what this becomes." She met my gaze, and for the first time, there was no distance between what was said and what was meant. "Yes," she said, and that was enough.